Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to PIDE webinar. Naeem sahab aa gaye? Lovely ji. Thank you ji. Let's start then. Naeem sahab, thank you very much for participating. Welcome to the PIDE webinar jointly with the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. We are very proud to have today with us the Chief Statistician of Pakistan, Mr. Naeem Zafar, and his colleagues. We're going to discuss the rebasing of GDP. As you know, every country after a few years rebases the GDP because, quite frankly, GDP is an estimate. And as we make estimates, obviously there are errors that build up over time, and then a rebasing takes place. In Pakistan, it becomes a bit of a political activity, but PIDE is not a political institution. We want to learn about the rebasing. This is a technical discussion. As I said, rebasing happens every few years, and it should happen. And the Bureau of Statistics spent a lot of time trying to understand how GDP is made, and they revise their estimates as we go along. So today we are very proud to have Mr. Naeem, Dr. Naeem Zafar, who is a very well-known person, used to be the chief economist of Sindh, worked in the Planning Commission, worked in universities, a man of extensive knowledge and who has now taken over as the chief statistician of Pakistan, a very responsible and a very important position. He is going to explain to us how rebasing was done, what the underlying methodology was, and how we should look at it. And of course, then we have two people to discuss this. Dr. Zahid Asghar from academia. He's a professor in the school of, in Quaid-E-Azam University, professor of economics. Then we've got another academic, Dr. Waqar Wadho from the Lahore School of Economics, who will also discuss the rebasing GDP. As I said, it's a very important exercise, and we should have academics look at it and PBS to explain it. So I will sit there and learn about it. So over to you, Dr. Naeem.
Sir, thank you very much for such a generous introduction. I feel humbled when I'm talking to such a committee of august professors and practitioners. Nevertheless, I'll just share about the rebasing, how we did it, why we did it, and the whole process, and then I'll talk about the results. So if we can share us, I cannot say small, it's a moderate size presentation. Screen share. Please share the screen. So, bada kar dein screen. Next. So I hope it is visible to all of you. Please let me know.
Yes, very visible. Thank you. Oh, I think you stopped sharing the slides.
So, okay.
Go ahead.
So I hope it's visible. So this is just a layout of what I'm going to talk about today. So very brief, Dr. Nadeem said. Nevertheless, I'll just very brief of what is rebasing, why it is done. I'll give a perspective, recent history, regional practice. Then I'll talk about some of the review procedures we have at PBS when we were doing the rebasing exercise, national and international stakeholders which were involved in this review process. Then we, since 2015-16, we have been doing, rather we have done major surveys, studies, and census, which were crucial for this rebasing exercise. So I'll just walk you through those surveys, and then I'll share the results of the rebasing. Then I'll briefly talk about the sectoral dimension of these results, what happened in the three major sectors and their subsectors. Then I'll briefly touch upon the growth comparison at the constant prices. Talk about the gross fixed capital formation. Actually, from this, I will be moving to the expenditure side of the GDP. So, as all of you are practitioners, I'm just a humble person, most of the time learning from you. We are employing a mixed approach for GDP estimation. So we are estimating the gross value addition from all sectors and summing it up to arrive at a number. We call it GDP, and then from that we apply the expenditure approach. So we have a list of the uses of that cumulative GVA, and from there we arrive at the consumption, which is the dominant part of our GDP, and from there we move to the estimation of net primary income, and finally we'll talk about the per capita GDP. So this is the brief outlay of today's talk. Please move on. Next. So it is a process of what is GDP? It is a process of replacing an old base with a more recent base year to keep up with the evolution in the prices. So as we talked that economy changes and new sector emerges. So in order to capture this, we have to rebase. The prices change over time. To capture all those changes, we do the rebasing. It reflects a more accurate picture of size and structure of the economy. It incorporates new activities that were not previously captured in estimation of GDP. It takes an attempt to improve the coverage, the formalization, and own account production where necessary, and it improves the international comparability of the GDP. Please move on. Why we do it? It provides economic indicators which are more representative of the current economic structure compared to that which in which GDP was based on a older base period. It gives the better understanding of industries which drive growth. Rebasing impact macroeconomic indicators such as tax to GDP, debt to GDP, current account balance to GDP, and per capita. We know that denominator of all these ratios is GDP. So as a result of rebasing, GDP changes and hence these ratios. And changing the database for modeling and forecasting. Please, next. So this is a brief history of the rebasing exercises done by Pakistan and by regional countries. So you can see that we are fairly updated now. I'm talking about Pakistan. The first rebasing was done in 59-60, second was in 1980 and 81, third was in 99 and 2000, and the last one was 2005-6, and by the grace of God, now we are done with rebasing the GDP using the base of 2015-16. So we are fairly updated, and a good thing which I think it's worthwhile to share. All of us know that we have a huge challenge of conducting the census 2022. So hopefully we'll be done with census in end of this year by November and December. And the first thing we'll take up after this is going for rebasing again, because again it will take 2 to 3 years. And the same time we plan to rebase the prices also. So we have planned this to synchronize the rebasing, updating of prices, and initiation of next rebasing exercise as soon as we are done with census activities. So this is just a brief, and Pakistan is now fairly updated if it is compared with the regional countries. Please move to the next slide. So this is a brief history of how we started. So Governing Council is the apex body which guide us on the strategic issues, policy directives. So they met in their 5th meeting and in 2014 and decided to change the base from 2005-6 to 2015-16, and alongside they also advised us to change the price base from 2007-8 to 2015-16. So good thing is that now your rebased GDP and the price, they are synchronized. So resultantly, we changed the base of price from 7-8 to 15-16, and it was implemented since July 2019. And now we have rebased the GDP from 5-6 to 15-16. And it's been thoroughly reviewed by national experts and international experts and multilateral also, including World Bank. Please move on. Now there are certain covenants, obligations which we have to comply with when we are doing rebasing. So we have to comply with SNA 2008, System of National Account. It is the international statistical standard for national accounts. We are complying with this. International Standard of Industrial Classification, Isaac Ref 4, Central Production Classification. version 2, classification of individual consumption according to purpose, QuaidE-Azam, classification of the functions of government. We are complying with all these international standards. And the data on this annual GDP is extensively used and reviewed by multilaterals, very prominently IMF, all multilaterals, UN agencies, and of course, it's consumed by our own stakeholders, academia, policymakers. Please move on. So when this, we were directed by Governing Council to rebase the GDP, the several meetings were held, and it was seen that what new studies and census and surveys ought to be done to unearth those sectors which were not captured in the previous base. So, and then there was some institutional arrangement. Say, for national experts, the review committee was formed. So they reviewed the results between 23rd July 2020 to 8 September, and they shared quite a few suggestions. They were incorporated. Then we did an extensive exercise very recently, which lasted between 9th November 21 to December. So it was a Zoom meeting, more than a month. We were meeting with them almost every day, 4 to 7, because they are not synchronous with our PSD. So after that exercise, the World Bank shared that the compilation method used in rebasing exercise are well aligned with SNA 2008 recommendations. They gave certain recommendations, especially for the deflators and inflators, and those have been incorporated. Please move on. As far as the composition of national expert is concerned, the major stakeholders, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, State Bank of Pakistan, representative from PIDE, chairman from Statistics Department of Quaid-E-Azam University. They were part of this National Expert Committee. And can you please click on the industry experts? Yes. So, as I just mentioned, that there were several surveys, census, and studies, and what to be included and whether the surveys were done rightly and how they should be done. So the opinion was sought from the private sector, from academia, and this is just a brief of the stakeholders which were involved in that consultation. Please move on. Move on. Yeah, move to next slide. So this was the process adopted. Significance of rebasing. It reflects the share of industrial activities in gross domestic product, gross fixed capital formation, and expenditure on GDP over a period of time. It revalidate the ratios and constant growth rate. Those who are into this business of macroeconomic and rebasing, they know that in the value addition, there are certain estimation ways. So you try to form estimate the ratios about the input, output, and the immediate consumption for the economic sectors, and those ratios have to be updated, because when there are certain limitations, then maybe you can continue with little older things, but it's always advisable to update those ratios, because that helps to capture the value addition of that sector, and that is the very purpose of this rebasing exercise. So these ratios were updated and validated, and they helped in the enhancing the implementation of SNA 2008. Please move on. This is just a brief of the different surveys, census, and studies we did. I will first talk about the surveys. Rent survey, it was done in 2015. Then we did an extensive survey for small and household manufacturing industries in 2015. Then on construction, we did quite a lot of things. Construction survey, we did the household part in 2014-15. Family budget survey, Haque was done in 15-16 to re-estimate the consumption of household. Then we did a survey on non-profit institutions, NGOs, in 2015-16. We did survey on wholesale retail trade, repair of automobiles, motor vehicles, etc. in 16-17. And then we did a survey on other private services, 2016 and 17. I'll talk more about this other private services. And as a result of this survey, we were able to get quite a good number of industries which were previously lumped, and their contribution in GDP was much dwarfed than what actually they are doing. Despite all this, still the size of other private survey is significant, and we plan to further dissect it and see that which sectors can be taken out from this, because they in their own right are discrete and they should be dealt separately. Then we did few censuses also. We did the census of electricity establishments, census of exploration and mining companies, census for manufacturing industries, which was long due. We completed this recently. And then, but one thing which is pending, agriculture and livestock census. I can talk about the causes of delay, and I don't think it's worthwhile. But the good thing is that this will be done as soon as the census is done, because this is a part of next rebasing. So this is one of the, I would say, area where we need to improve. Then we did quite a lot of studies, forest products, road transport, hotels and restaurants. With these, please move on. And then I mentioned that we, in other private services, we did surveys, 14 surveys on these sectors. Publishing activities, we did a survey, TV channels, computer-related activities, real estate, accounting activities, scientific research and development, veterinary services, other professional, scientific and technical activities, advertising and market research, administrative and support services, education. I mean, this is in itself, it's such a monolithic, discrete sector, but previously it was lumped. So we did a survey in 2016 of the private sector education provider, and there's phenomenal value addition increase in this sector. Similar trend happened in human health. Again, the private sector healthcare provider, they were previously lumped with other private services, and we were mindful of this, that this should be carved out. So we did survey on this, and as a result, we were able to take it out from other private services, arts, entertainment, and recreation. And despite this, there are still sizable activities in other private services. I'll show you. Please move on. Then there were several additional studies, especially on agriculture, wholesale, and retail. So we did a study on agriculture input-output and trade and transport margin in 16-17. We did a study on plant nurseries. It's a very strongly increasing sector, especially in context of the landscape and urban development, and because of the fact that people are now using services of these nurseries more. We did a study on cotton ginning, study on forestry, honey, inland fishing, marine fishing, on mining and quarrying. We did a study of input-output of selected mining industries, stone crushing. We did a study, slaughtering. It's very closely related to livestock, and livestock is one sector which was able to give boost to agriculture despite the fact that there was decline in major crops. So we did a study on that also. Wholesale, retail, and transport. We did a study on repair of motor vehicles, hotels and restaurants. We know that there's such a spread in this sector, eating out. But still we are lacking on the, I would say, the IT sectors in the food supply business, like Food Panda, and there's some other emerging also. That's one area where we lack, and this is planned in the next rebasing. Please move on. In transport, communication, and storage, we did studies on railway franchise booking agents, inland boats, freight forwarders, travel agents, courier services, franchise post offices, cable operators and internet service providers, storage, shipping agents, custom clearing, goods forwarding, and many of these studies, for example, When we talk about internet service provider, it was lumped with transport and communication. If I'm not wrong, my colleagues can correct me. And there are the same is happening with other studies also. They were lumped previously in other sectors. And after discussion, we thought that they should be taken out and they should not be lumped. In finance and insurance, we did study on stockbrokers, exchange companies, and finally in government statistics, we did a study on autonomous bodies. So these, please move on. So overall, there were 46 census surveys and studies done over last 5 years to rebase the GDP from 2005-6 to 2015-16, and that gave us confidence that we are able to portray a better and representative picture of economy, which is much better than what it used to be on the base of 2005 and 6. So very quickly walk you through the salient feature of new base 15-16. All these surveys, census, and studies have led to inclusion of new activities in the economy. The input-output structure of industries is updated in various instances, and that will be helpful in developing supply-use table. Application of double deflation as per recommendations of 2008 SNA. It's a practice that output is deflated by one inflation index, and the intermediate consumption is inflated or deflated by some other inflation index. That is the recommendation. We were not following it, so we corrected ourselves. But in order for us to do this, we needed to know about which deflator may be used for which sector. So result of these studies helped us in knowing that. Then we were able to apply the implicit volume indicator, which is specifically used for energy sector, electricity. That was again a recommendation from World Bank, and it's a practice in vogue. So we are happy that we are able to apply it. I must say that there is some room of improvement here. We'll try to improve ourselves. The problem comes from the fact that when we talk about the input of the power generation sector, there's a mix. So from the fossil fuel to hydro to nuclear, and that there the input cost varies. The structure of energy producer that varies, and as a result, it's hard to come up with some input deflator which is representative of the whole energy sector, energy production sector. So the dissemination of information is now at a more detailed level as per Pakistan Standard Industrial Classification Code 2010, and Wasi Saab and Atiq and Fazil Beg Saab, I think they can tell better that now the trade standards, the SNA, they are now synchronized as well as the prices. So we are talking about a system in which all these systems are synergizing each other. Please move on. So I hope that it's not information bombardment. I mean, I'm trying to be quick, yet I'm trying my best that communication happens on both sides. So I talk and you receive this also. So as a result of all these studies, census and surveys, this is the result. So I would request you to focus on column 4, column 3, column 4, and column 6 to begin with. I hope you can see that in column 3, we are talking about 2015-16 base. In column 4, we are talking about 2015-16 GDP using the base of 2005 and 6. And column 6 is talking about the changes between the two. So to interpret this, it's like this, that column 4 gives you the estimates of GDP. The lowest row overall is 27.4 trillion. So if we continue to use 2005-6 base and estimated the GDP of 2015-16, so on that older base, our GDP was 27.4 trillion. As a result of rebasing, and studies and inclusion of various sectors, etc., etc. Now, on the new base of 2015-16, our GDP for the same year, 15-16, is 30.508 trillion, which means an increase of 3.107 trillion, and in percentage terms, it's 11.3%. So I hope I've conveyed the message. At this point, if there are any comments or questions to remove any confusion, only for this slide, it's welcome. Otherwise, I can move on, or I can talk about the changes in the sector. Dr. Nadeem?
जी मैं ये देख रहा था ये changes in value added, so you're saying कि 11 billion rupees का adjustment है.
No, sir. So let me express it again. So your column 4 is the lowest row is 27.4 trillion. So this was the GDP of 2015-16 if you were using a base of 2005 and 6. Okay. And when you did the studies and included sectors, blah, blah, and then you computed your 2015-16 GDP according to new base, it's 30.508 trillion, which means that rebasing resulted in an increase of 3.107 trillion, means increase from 27 to 30.5. That is the first message. And in percentage terms, it's 11.3.
Okay, great. ठीक है, clear to me. Anybody else, folks? Shah Saab, क्या पूछ रहे हैं? Shah Saab, you have a question here?
जी सर, बिल्कुल मेरा सवाल है. तो सर इसके पीछे का मैकेनिज्म क्या है कि जब जो सर ने बात की है कि 2005 और 6 के बेस में आपकी जो जीडीपी आ रही है वो 27.4 ट्रिलियन आ रही है और 2015 और 16 के बेस में वो 30.5 ट्रिलियन हो गई है. तो इसके पीछे का मैकेनिज्म क्या है, क्या पर्पस है? बिकॉज आई एम नॉन टेक्निकल, तो आई वांट टू अंडरस्टैंड कि इसके पीछे का मैकेनिज्म क्या है जिसकी वजह से 3 ट्रिलियन का जो है इंक्रीज हुआ है. दिस इज व्हाट आई वांट टू अंडरस्टैंड.
Definitely. Yeah, I could anticipate that this is such a valid question. And if you just hold to this question for maybe a minute or so, I'll very briefly talk about, I mean, these numbers are already displayed, that what was the contribution of agri, industry and services in this 11.3% increase. And then I'll walk you through each sector, what studies, how they helped us in unearthing the contribution which was there but not captured, and the prices which were erroneously recorded high or low using the old base. And when we did the surveys, we came to know that the prices were either lower or higher. That also changed the value addition of those sectors. So I'll talk about the studies and their implications, which led to this change of 3.1 trillion very shortly.
Okay.
In fact, that will be the sequel.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Please move on. So just a second. So maybe it can interest you. If we focus on last two columns, column 8 and 9, they are giving you the structure of the economy. So in 2005-6 base, agri was 23%, not much change. 15-16, it's 24. Industry was 20.9, came down a bit, 19.5. Services almost there, 56 to 56.6, and that sums up to 100. Now we can move on to next. Okay, so let's focus on the impact of rebasing, and let's first talk about the agriculture sector. So agriculture sector is again comprising of 4 sectors. The first is crops, second is livestock, third is forestry, and fourth is fishing. The overall value addition, let's first focus on the GVA. So again, following the same summary as we were using for the aggregates, if we see column 4, then according to the old base, 2005-6, 2015-16 GDP was the agriculture contribution was estimated at 6.75 trillion, the last row. And when we redid this using 2015-16 base, or then for 2015-16, the number came out to be 7.3 trillion. Now, that's the overall gist. Now, if we focus on column 6, which is shaded in yellow, I hope all of you can see that. So you can see that at the bottom, the increase in overall value addition of agriculture is 8.3%, and you should be able to see certain negatives. So for crops, we actually declined. So 4.7% decline. And in crop, the important crop, which comprises of 4 major crops, we all know, that declined by almost 15%. Other crops, which comprises of potato, onion, tomatoes, some perishables, that jumped by 23+%. The cotton ginning, that declined by 24.7%. Livestock increased by 17.8%. And forestry, that declined by 5.3%. And finally, fishing, that increased by 3.5%. So the gist is that despite the drop in important crops, the increase which came from the livestock was and other crops, mostly perishable, was good enough to lift the sector up by 8.3%. That is the gist of this exercise. So can you please move to next slide? And now this slide actually tells you the studies, the surveys done at the background, which led to changes in these numbers. So the new additions, which were not included in 2015-16 base, were plant nurseries, farm honey, sericulture, detailed estimation of intermediate consumption structure, application of relevant deflators as compared to last base. So these 5, my colleague will talk about the last 2 in more detail, so that this can be made harmless and a person like me can understand. And then as a result of this, the important crops, there was a decline. So in 2005, according to 2005-6 base, 15-16 GDP was 1.718 trillion, and it declined to 1.462 trillion. And why this decline happened? As I mentioned, that we did the farm gate price surveys and the margin surveys, the transport and profit margin, and that led to this decline. The overestimation of the deflator of 2005-6 price base. So the deflator was overestimated. It was on the higher side. Again, as a result of these studies, we were able to have better estimation of intermediate consumptions. Here, I would request my colleague Haque to please talk about the impact of the surveys for farm gate price and the deflator, so that our audience can understand this.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, as you have mentioned that in the rebasing in 2015-16, we had to conduct a number of surveys, studies, and censuses to capture the input-output ratios as well as the farm gate prices. So in order to have the better estimation of the farm gate prices, because we have 125-26 crops which are captured in the annual national accounts. So in order to have the farm gate prices of these crops, we conducted a detailed village level survey, and efforts were made to include all the villages as well as all the crops wherever they are cultivated. For example, if chilies are cultivated in Sindh in a particular village, then that village was taken so that the actual prices and the margins of that crop are properly captured. So in this way, a proper sampling technique was applied, and from each village, a certain number of farmers was included, which included the large farmers, the middle farmers, and the small farmers. And then questionnaires were filled by using our own field staff, which is available in 34 regional and field offices. So with the help of this new survey, we were able to have the new farm gate prices. as well as a detailed input-output structure of each crop, so that as Chief Statistician has mentioned, that we were overestimating crops, and the actual contribution which came was about 1.5 billion instead of 1.7 billion. So this overestimation was because of the continuous use of the deflators, because we actually compiled these crops on constant prices and then we inflated to the current prices. So when we inflated, we used the price deflators, and those price deflators were overestimating the current prices, as well as the input structure was slightly underestimated. So with the renewed input-output structure, because pesticides, contribution of pesticides and fertilizers, that was being underestimated. So in this new survey, we have been able to have their real share in the value addition. So I will hand over back to the Chief Statistician.
I hope this is conveyed. So the deflator or inflator which was used earlier was upward biased. As a result, it was giving you a higher number for value addition for these specific agriculture sectors, and hence higher GDP. When we did these studies, visited farm gate, asked about the output and at what prices the producers sold their livestock and other agriculture produces, turns out that the prices were low. We revised the inflators and deflators, and hence the contribution of these agricultures and the subsectors to the overall GDP was revised downward. That is the gist. So I hope this is clear. Can you please move on? So livestock increased from 3.8 trillion according to 5/6 base to 4.53 trillion. They were not reported. Their contribution was lesser. So they are now better captured now. Forestry, although small, but its contribution decreased from 171 billion to 162. So this was contributing less, but this bias was not captured according to 5/6 base. Fishing, its contribution increased from 112 to 116 billions. And this resulted because of the survey of inland and marine fishing. Please move on. Now let's talk about the impact of rebasing on service sector. So, sorry, industry. So again, there are 4 subsectors to begin with. Mining and quarrying. Second is manufacturing. Third is electricity, gas, and water supply. And fourth is construction. So the on the old base, the contribution of industry sectors was 5.31 trillion in GDP. The last row, after rebasing, the contribution is almost 5.94 trillion. So it registered an increase of 11.9%. And in the yellow column, you can see the contribution of each of these subsectors and the sub-subsectors in this increase of 11.9%. So you can see that biggest contribution, the increase came from the small sector. I just mentioned when I was talking about surveys, small household manufacturing survey was done quite extensively. So as a result, its contribution, which was almost 90 billion, and it was not captured. So as a result of that, we were able to capture its contribution. The large scale manufacturing increased modestly by only 1.4%. Small scale increased 21.7%. Slaughtering registered an increase. It's the downstream sector of livestock. So meat consumption is going up. It increased by 9%. There was significant increase in electricity, gas, and water supply, 25.7%. Some of this is because of accounting, and a significant portion of the increase in contribution from electricity, gas, and water supply is because of the fact that we did surveys of the water consumption and supply for industrial sector, for household sector, and for agriculture sector, especially the water supply which they are securing from private resources. The water supply on the municipal services which are coming from the public sector, they are already captured, but the private sector was omitted. So as I mentioned, that the survey helped us in capturing this. Then there was phenomenal increase in construction. On the old base, its contribution, in 2015-16 was 601 billion, and in the new base, its contribution is almost 900 billion. It registered an increase of 49.5%. As far as structure is concerned, that changed slightly. It came downward from 20.9% to 19.5%. Can you please move on? So these are the reasons of variation in 15-16 GVA in industrial sector. So the new additions, which were not missing from the 5-6 base, the inclusion of sea salt, inclusion of hydro, private sector power producers, IPPs, inclusion of private sector water consumption, I just talked, changes in deflators of intermediate consumption of electricity, there also led to these changes, and stone crushing, it was not present in 2005-6, now it is. Fresh estimation, so these sectors were there, but their estimation, the studies were dated, so we redid the studies to reassess their contribution. Exploration companies, important minerals, census for manufacturing industry is very crucial. A survey of small and household manufacturing industries, not done since long time, was initiated in 15-16, completed recently, last year. Study of Vyoparis, the middleman at village level, that was done in 16-17, and that helped us in knowing the ratios and the profit margins also. We did a census of electricity establishments, construction survey for private households, survey of construction establishments. So when it comes to construction, we not only did the rent survey to reassess its contribution, we did the construction survey for private households as well as for construction establishments, touched upon both. And we estimation of construction industry through our new methodology. So as a result of this, mining increased from 653 billion to 691. The underlying studies were revised pit head prices through survey, better estimation of input-output structure of the industry. Please move on. Okay, the large-scale manufacturing increased from 2.8 trillion to 2.84. So the census of manufacturing industry that helped us in unearthing this change. Small-scale industries, as a result of SHMI, I just talked, its contribution increased from 407 billion to 495. Slaughtering, again, we did 2 studies. As a result, we were able to capture its contribution. Old base, it was 305 billion. New base, it increased to 332. Electricity, water, and gas supply, the contribution of these sectors increased from 540 to 681. I just mentioned the underlying studies and the causes. And the construction, again, I touched upon the underlying reasons. Its contribution increased from 601 billion to 899 billion, a phenomenal increase. Please move on. Lastly, we'll talk about the service sector. To begin with, let's first see the gist. Let's focus on the lowest row. So in column 4, you can see that on the old base of 5-6, the 15-16 GDP was 15 point, its contribution of this sector was 15.3 trillion. And after rebasing, contribution of this sector is 17.26 trillion, increase of 12.5%. If you focus on column number 6, and then you can see the contribution of each of the subsectors. And wholesale and retail, we know that it's by and large it moves in tandem with the commodity production sector. If that increases, then you can expect increase here, 16.6%. Transport storage increased. Accommodation and food services decreased by 13.4%. I should talk here about why accommodation and food services is in blue, and same is true for information and communication, education and health. So these were the sectors which were previously lumped with other sectors. Accommodation and food services were lumped with wholesale and retail. Information communication was lumped with transport and storage. And education and human health, they were both lumped with other private service. And you can see in front of education, row number 8, its contribution increased from 599 billion to 954 billion, increase of almost 60%. And this was possible only after doing the private sector education service providers survey. Same happened with the health. Its contribution increased by 12.2%. Other private service, can you please move your cursor to column 4, other private service? Yes, you can see that other private service, you can still see this huge number, 2.13 trillion. If you see column 4, and its contribution increased according to new base to 2.29 trillion. So we have asked ourselves that this is still too monolithic and it should be further factored down. So there are quite a few sectors which should be taken out from this huge 2.29 trillion, and this is one of the core agenda for next rebasing exercise. Please move on. So these are some of the reasons of variation, why the contribution of several service subsectors changed. Trade margins and fresh assessment of marketable supply of commodities of agriculture, fresh marketable supplies of commodity and margins from CMI and SHMI, census for manufacturing indices, and small household manufacturing industry, fresh assessment of repair of motor vehicles through study of other private services, census survey of hotel and restaurant industries, railway franchise, boats inland, freights, travel agents, courier, franchise post office, cable operators and internet service providers, storage, shipping, so forth. So these studies actually help to explain the numbers contribution of the service sector. Please move on. The list continues. Again, the service sector, publishing activities, TV channels, real estate, accounting services, scientific research, advertising and market research, other professional services, veterinary services, administrative and support, education, health, arts, entertainment, other private activities. Please move on. So as a result, the wholesale and retail increased from 4.6 trillion to 5.38 trillion. Transport and storage increased from 3.2 trillion to 3.45 trillion. Accommodation and food services declined from 491 to 426 billion. Please move on. Information and communication increased from 457 to 611. Finance decreased. Real estate increased from 1.5 to 1.73 trillion. Public admin increased marginally. Education increased phenomenally, 599 to 955. Health from 374 to 420. Please move on. Other private services, which is still lumpy. So you can see a long list. TV channels, publishing, computer related, real estate, accounting. I mean, these are still part of this, and we have to ponder that how and what to carve out from this to make this less monolithic. Nevertheless, it increased from 2.12 to 2.29. Move on. Okay, now we comes to the results. Please move on. Okay, bravo. So now, in order for us to be on the same page, shared understanding, you can see two tables in the left flank of this PowerPoint. And the first table, the first row gives you the GDP of years starting from 1617 to 2021 on the old base. So if you can see the cursor, 2005-6 base, using this base, 1617 was GDP was 5.22%, and it won't harm us if we see the growth rate at constant prices. on 2015-16 base. So the 16-17 GDP, which was at constant prices, the growth rate was 5.22%. In the new base, the growth rate was revised down to 4.61%. 17-18, the growth rate on the old base was 5.53. It was revised up to 6.1. 18-19, it was revised up from 2.08 to 3.12. 19-20, it was previously negative 0.4 almost, and it was revised further down to negative 1. And finally, 2020-21, it was on the old base 5.37, and new base, the constant growth rate was at 5.57%. When we talk about the numbers, on the old base, the GDP from 2015-16, it was 11 trillion, and it increased to 13.23 trillion in 2021. And in the new base, it was 30.51 trillion in 15-16, and it increased to 36.49 trillion. So now these numbers are approved. So now for a comparison, the both series are estimated for some time at both bases. But once we everyone feels confident, then we for all purposes we just continued 15-16 base. On the right flank, you can see a red and black line. So the black is old base and the red is new base. And we have been talking about the V-shaped recovery quite extensively. You can see that this is a V-shaped recovery. So there's a shift in the left bottom flank. You can see there's a shift. Please move on. Okay, so maybe we can skip this because this is the growth rate of agriculture. Similar story, not much different. Move to next slide. What happened in this industry? So again, the story, if you are using the old base, story if you are using the new base, numbers of GDP at constant prices according to old base, according to new base. Please move on. And finally, what happened in services? So we know that dominantly Pakistan, the biggest contributor is service. So the V-shaped recovery is, you can see that majorly is driven by service sector. Move on. Okay, so now we are slowly moving from so far we talked about the aggregation of GDP of all sectors, and we arrived at a number of GDP. Now we'll slowly move from here to the estimation of the per capita consumption, I would say. So we begin this exercise first by talking about gross fixed capital formation, the investment. So you can see that in first column you have total GFCF. According to old base, it was 4.095 trillion. Or according to new base, it's 4.657 trillion. So if we focus on this column, the third colored column, the increase is 13.7. So the gist is that according to old base, almost 600 billion investment was there by public or private sector, but it was not captured. So when the surveys and studies were done, census were done, we were able to capture this, and as a result, the capital formation, which was previously going unnoticed, is now captured, and it has this change of base led to increase of 13.7%. So it's not that this investment was not there in 2005-06. It was there, but it was not captured. That is the case. Then there is a distribution of what trade in private sector, public sector, and general government. So most of this increase of 13.7% actually came from private sector investment, 18.1%. Rest is detailed yearly trend, so I think we can dispense with this detail. We got the gist. Please move on. Okay, now as I said that we are drifting from this GDP and we are moving to the expenditure, because our objective is to know how the per capita consumption fared. So according to SNA 2008,
Naeem sir, sorry, can I take you back to the investment again?
Sure.
मुझे ठीक समझ नहीं आया
Okay.
कि investment का क्या है, ये जो new base old base जो आपने लिखा हुआ 13 5.7% इंक्रीज आई है, प्राइवेट सेक्टर में 18.1 आई है, पब्लिक सेक्टर में 5.8 आई है, and general government is 0.7. So what about the investment GDP ratio? उसमें क्या फर्क आया? Has the investment GDP ratio gone up by much? थोड़ा सा तो गया ही है, पर कितना? Any change in the investment ratio?
तो उस पे अभी वर्क कर रहे हैं, इम्प्रूव तो हुआ है, लेकिन एग्जैक्ट नंबर अभी शायद ना बता सकते, एक आध दिन लगेगा हमें।
ओके, ठीक है, बिकॉज 13.7% ग्रो किया है। आपका जीडीपी टोटल कितना ग्रो किया है इसमें इन द ओल्ड बेस टू न्यू बेस?
और 11.3% रीबेसिंग की वजह से 11.3।
ओके, सो दैट मींस रफली देयर विल बी अ वेरी स्मॉल इंक्रीज इन द इन्वेस्टमेंट जीडीपी रेशियो,
वेरी स्मॉल, मार्जिनल होगा।
ठीक है जी, ठीक है,
प्रोडक्टिविटी नहीं बढ़ी है सर।
ओके, ग्रेट, थैंक यू।
प्रोडक्टिविटी नहीं बढ़ी है। आगे चलें। अच्छा, so now we are moving away from GV's cumulative GVA and moving to per capita. So let's first take this exercise is initiated by seeing that where GDP is consumed. So it's consumed by household in their consumption, non-profit institutions final consumption. It's consumed by government, general government final consumption expenditure. It's consumed for capital formation, changes in inventories, acquisition less disposal of valuables, exports minus imports. So these are the major heads for this GDP. Please move on. Now, from this cumulative GVA, when we knock off all items except for household final consumption, we arrive at the proportion of GDP consumed by households. So the row 2, which is start from NIPIsh to I would say less exports of goods and services, this sum is knocked from the summation of value addition, and that's how we get the household final consumption. So we can see that in column 3, according to old base 2015-16, final household consumption was 23 trillion, and according to new base, it changed to 26.1 trillion. And the change of base led to increase in household consumption by 11.65%, and this is shown in column 5. So in column 5, in this row, you can see the change of base led to increase in household consumption by 11.65%. Please move on. So these are the expenditure series on current prices, starting from 15-16 to 19-20. Household final consumption. I keep asking my colleagues what this NIPIsh acronym stand for. I know that it has got something to do with NGOs and philanthropy, not profit things. I still need to memorize it, sorry. General government final consumption, gross fixed capital formation, changes in inventories, valuables, exports of goods and non-factor, less imports of goods and non-factor services. You sum them up, and then you, by summing all these entries for each year, you get the current series nominal from 2015-16 to 2019-20. So it increased from 32.7 trillion for 15-16 to 47.5 trillion in 19-20. Please move on. Okay, this is the percentage share. So the biggest share is consumption. So household consumption, which was almost 80% of the income in 2015-16, that has increased to 81.3% in 2019-20. The NIPIsh final consumption, the NGOs philanthropy 0.91% increased to 1.03, government 10.6 to 11.79%, more than 1% increase. Capital formation came down by almost 1%, 14.2 to 13.2. Inventories stayed there. Valuables almost unchanged, stagnant. Exports of good and non-factor services 8.7 to 9.3. Less import of goods and non-factor services 15.9 to 17.4. So this is the story of the percentage of the consumption of GDP, how it's spent. Okay, move on. From here, I would request my colleague Haque to please take on.
Thank you, sir. So we are almost at the end of the presentation, and we are sharing with you the net primary income. So as you know that net primary income, it comprises of the receipts as well as the payments. So in the receipts, we take the compensation of employees, which are also in the shape of the family maintenance, investment income, and other primary income. So in 2005-06 base, if you can see at column 2, so it was about 362 billion. In 2015-16 on 2005-06 prices, it was reported as 2.4 trillion. And now when we have calculated it in 2015-16, it is at 2.1 trillion. So there is a decline of about 12% in the overall receipts. As far as, and that has been...
I think, can you please explain the reason of this?
Yes, sir. If you had seen our previous base decomposition of the net primary income, so there was another additional row here, which used to be the 14% of the remittances, which used to be carried by the people in their baggage. And that 14% was estimated on the basis of a study which was conducted way back in 1999-2000, and that was being carried out with us in the old base. But in the new base, when we actually found that that 14% was being overestimated in a way that now people are not carrying any amount with them as a baggage, and most of the amount is coming either through the banking channel or through the formal channels. So that 14% which was being estimated here and was placed in the old base, that has now been removed. And also due to the restrictions of the FATF, as it is not allowed to carry a handsome amount with you as a baggage. So that 14% has been removed from this estimation. And due to the removal of that 14%, we see a dip of 12% in the overall estimates of the total receipts. Rest are the same figures which we used to take in the old base. So as a final conclusion, the net primary income at current prices stands at about 1.5 trillion as compared to 1.8 trillion which we were using in the old base, which is a decline of 16.3%. And if we go to the next slide, which takes us to the per capita income. So if you see, this is the GDP at the basic prices, and then we have the taxes, less subsidies, which takes us to the GDP at market prices. So GDP at market prices comes out to be 32.7 trillion in 2015-16, and which has moved to 55.5 trillion in 2020-21. And if net primary income is added to it, then it becomes the gross national income. So the gross national income stands at 34.2 trillion in 2015-16, which moves on to 59.34 trillion. Another important development which we have done in this, that in this calculation, we have used the results of the 2017 population census, which were approved a few months back. So according to that population, this is 200 million to 222.59 million. And the per capita income in rupee terms comes out to be 170,000 in 2015-16 to 266,000 in 2020-20. And if we apply it in dollar terms, so in 2015-16, it stands out to be 1640. and in 2020-21 it is 1666. So this is the overall series and the impact of the rebasing on the net primary income, on the per capita income, as well as the GDP at market prices. So with this, we come to the end of this presentation, and now the forum is open for the Q&A session, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Naeem Sahib and folks. A very good job. I think it's very clear. I understand it very well. Now let me quickly turn to the discussants. Waqar Sahib, over to you. Can you try and do it in 10 minutes? Then we'll go to Zahid Asghar.
Thank you, Nadeem Sahib. I will definitely try to do in 10 minutes. It might take a little longer. Let me try. Okay, can you see my slide, please?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Naeem. It was quite extensive presentation, and a few things that were not clear to us also became clear. Thank you, PIDE, for inviting us. So I won't be spending much time on highlighting why it is important to measure GDP. We have already spoken. Nadeem Sahib spoke in the beginning as well. What I want to focus on is that economies are dynamic systems that evolve over the time. So the measurements, GDP or any other, also needs to be updated to maintain the data quality, and also to make it more what we call representative of the structural changes that are taking place during those years. Okay, so when we talk about is was spoken before, rebasing is something, a normal exercise. It's done everywhere, done every few years. I think the good thing it provides an opportunity to update our GDP measures and try to measure it more accurately. But what is important that this is not something automatic. So it is done periodically, but there are steps involved. And these steps could create kind of controversies that we see. And controversies could be of two types. Political one, which we are seeing in Pakistan, and also the technical. We'll be focusing a lot more on the technical side. I think a good example is a recent rebasing in India. I was surprised that not only there was a political controversies, but also there were a number of academic papers that were written and trying to prove why these estimations were not correct, for example, including one influential paper from their ex-chief economist, for example. Okay, so how I see it, I think two aspects of this entire exercise of measurement are important to think about controversies or for transparency, for example. One is the entire process of rebasing. How is it done? I will explain it more in details, but this has more to do with the transparency of that process. The second one, which to me is more important, is that when we do this exercise of measurement or remeasurement, what we get the final series, is it really a representative of those structural changes that have taken place? And I'll be spending most of my time on this one and just try to see that whether whatsoever availability of data is with us, can I make some knowledgeable case about the representation. Okay, when we talk about transparency of the base here, I think three aspects are important. Who is doing it, whether that is an independent body or not. So I think one part of maybe the controversy in Pakistan could be that recent shift of the Bureau from independent body to under the Planning Commission, but I'm not going to focus on that one because I said this is more going to be the economics or technical related discussion. I think transparency also requires having independent technical review. And we were seeing there were a number of reviews that POS arranged. We didn't know in details what was asked from them because just having a review team is fine, but I think it would be nice if some of the minutes are reported somewhere and we see that at what stage they were involved, whether that was just to give go ahead or they were looking at the technicalities of those surveys and census as well. The third one, which is more important, that how do we select a year? So if I have to rebase my GDP, which year should I pick? When we look into the literature, the best practices require the base year to be a normal year. When we say a normal year, means that this should be a representative of the situation in a country. And why we need this, because as you were seeing in the previous presentation also, that there are also like a inflation and deflation. So you need to have a year which is pretty much closer to average in terms of prices rather than any extreme. One example you could think about it, what if someone start making 2020 as a base year? 2020 was a very exceptional year. So this cannot be the base year, for example, for most of the rebasing exercises worldwide. How did we decide? You already saw this was actually ex ante. So, I mean, you can see that it didn't follow that best practice that I was suggesting. So this was ex ante, as mentioned by PBS, that it was decided earlier that we have to rebase and rebase at 2015-16, okay? Irrespective of whether 2015-16 is a normal year or not a normal year. Was it a normal year then? So I just did simple exercise. You know, I don't have detailed data. These are, most of the data are still with Bureau. So how representative is this 2015-16? I was just looking at the CPI. You can also look at the GDP deflators, pretty much similar figure. So if you look at 2015-16, I think this is the year where we had a historically low prices, like historical low inflation, let's put it correctly. And we haven't seen that inflation in, let's say, last 30, 40 years. If you exclude 1970s and you start thinking after, we haven't seen that much dip in inflation rate. But having a low inflation is not a problem, provided that low inflation is randomly spread across all sectors. So this is more of an organic kind of inflation. Was it organic? I just tried to look at what could be a common factor that was pushing prices down or causing inflation lower during 15-16. And it turned out to be that there was really unparalleled drop in the oil prices. So this is, I mean, if you exclude this new pandemic-related drop in oil prices, 2015-16 saw a drastic decrease in the oil prices. So it turned out to be that the lower inflation that we were experiencing might have something to do with external shock, and that external shock, positive shock, was coming from the lower oil prices. Is there any problem then? Yes, as an economist, I would say, yes, there is a problem, because when you are studying different sectors, they have different level of dependency on oil. There could be sectors that are primarily dependent on oil. There could be others that would be secondary, for example, through energy requirement. There are others that might not be dependent at all. So what if prices or inflation is going down because of oil prices, let's say, then it will have a differential impact on these sectors. So if I make this as my base, this will affect the allocation of weightage that I can have for these sectors. And that might not be actually a representative kind of prices that I'm looking for. So this was just, I cannot prove it, for example, but these are some of the things that I could see, for example. We could easily go to another year where we have the normal inflation rate. As I said, my main focus would be that by doing this exercise, are we making our GDP series more representative of structural changes? So yes, economies are dynamic and we want to capture really the changes that are taking place, but this requires revisions. And what I try to do is I try to put in 3 yardsticks, and I think these are very important yardsticks. If I want to see whether this updated revision or updated GDP is representative of structural changes. So the first dimension, which I think is important, is that while we are doing these revisions, are we estimating at a fine enough level of details to identify, for example, contributors or the major trends and shifts that are taking place in the economy? Now, there could be various aspects in which we could go fine enough. For example, it could be frequency. There are many countries that are looking at GDP quarterly rather than yearly. Okay, it could be in terms of geographic levels. There are many countries that are looking at a state level, province level, in some cases at county level, for example. This brings in, for example, your seed is more closer to the structural changes and where they are taking place, for example. Also at the sectoral level, subsector, we heard a lot today that there was a lot of improvement when we want to look at, for example, series at the subsectoral levels. I will dig deeper into this. Second, I mean, we would make it more representative if we update our traditional data sources, for example, by conducting new censuses and conducting some representative surveys. Especially, I'm interested in two dimensions, like improving the coverage of these surveys and also improving the quality of these surveys. So we have seen there were, I mean, in total, a number of surveys that the Bureau did, but I haven't seen the talk about how representative were they, for example, and especially if you don't know the population, it gets very difficult even to think about what a representative survey would look like. The third, were the new data sources leveraged, for example? And I will also give you some example of what kind of new data sources are available in the modern digital world, where a lot of data is created and a lot of data is saved as well. So were we able to leverage these data? And I think any good points in these dimensions would make possible that the new series that we are having is actually representative of the structural changes that are taking place in our economy. So let me start with the first. Did we work on the frequency? So the question is, did the revisions help in updating methodology to release, for example, data at higher frequency of time, let's say quarterly? Unfortunately, no. So we didn't update that thing. Did the revisions help in updating methodology to release data in the sub-nation level, such as the provincial data? Can we get with these revisions? Again, unfortunately, no. Did the rebasing help in updating, for example, methodology to release data at the subsectoral level? Now, there is some movement, but I will tell you at least what is publicly available that so. I mean, you could say yes, you could say no. Then when you talk about were we updating the traditional data sources are the data sources that normally bureaus they use. Okay, these are not the modern, for example, digital data sources. Let's first start with census coverages. I will have two aspects of it. Our biggest contributor to GDP is services. Was there any census of services during this time? No. Was there any census of agriculture? No. Was there any census of industries? Not industries, but yes, CMI. But I tried to look into the CMI and there were quite a few questions over the entire exercise. And luckily CMI is something which Bureau has made it public recently, and we could see the process, how, for example, data was created. Okay, the second aspect of coverage is that, for example, there are some industries that have seen a tremendous growth during these years. We think about 2005 and 6 and now, and one of them is information and communication technology, for example. You think 2005 and think about the cell phones, think about the computers, think about even some others like surgical goods, for example. We have seen a tremendous growth in this. And I think this is something that was acknowledged by Bureau as well, by saying that this is something which we should separately estimate, and they have tried to separately estimate this, but they didn't conduct census for this. So this is I think there should have been a census of information and communication technologies given their rapid growth and the contribution to the society. But how did they do this? The information that is available on the website is through studies, but I mean, there's no study with a year mentioned or mentioned how representative was that study and so forth. Some of those how I came to know through the first presentation. The second aspect of census could be the quality. I said, not only we need to think about the coverage, but we need to think about the quality as well. And one aspect where I was especially interested in that, I mean, when you think about, let's think about cell phones, or let's think about the computers or the surgical instruments. Are they same from 2005 till now? What we see a cell phone now is a lot more sophisticated, and whatsoever is its price, it gives me a lot more value. And same is the case of computers, for example, and the more precision, for example, surgical instrument. So did the Bureau try to have the quality adjusted pricing, I didn't find it anywhere. So we were having, for example, a price, which here we might see that the price of computer has gone up. It's not the price going up, but maybe you look at versus the value, what value that computer or that cell phone is giving has also tremendously gone up. So there are different bureaus who run regulations and try to correct for quality adjusting, for example, in prices. The second was, as you have seen, and I think all these studies are not mentioned on Bureau's website. So we really don't know how representative are they. These are studies, might be excellent studies, but that is just a wild case for someone like me who wants to just to see that what was the sample size, what was the frame, was it really a representative, and what was the coverage, for example, if there was any attrition taking place, like who was responding, who was not responding, for example. These double surveys, there's no such information available. One census I found, so I tried to just dig deeper into that census, which is CMI 2015 and 16, and just try to understand that. How about the coverage and quality of CMI 15 and 16? When I was thinking for the frequency, one thing I noticed that where is 2010 and 11 CMI? So in Pakistan, CMI is done every 5 years, and Bureau actually did conduct CMI in 2010 and 11. In some provinces, the response rate was low, but in some provinces, the response rate was decent. For example, in Punjab, it was decent. I've seen a number of theses written on their data, and I've also seen a number of papers published in economics based on their data. So I think this will be more important when I talk about some abnormal changes in 2015 and 16 CMI, then maybe the 10 and 11 could help us understand why there were those abnormal changes taking place. So I don't know. I would be happy to know where is that CMI, and at least acknowledge that we conducted and response rate was very low, so we don't want to publish that. Okay, CMI was done in 2015-16, but the report was just released last year. I don't know where 5 years what this data was doing, and I work on firms, and I was trying to look for this data, but I didn't find. To my surprise, once I was attending a conference in 2018, and some foreign researchers were using this data. So there was this whole story, like they got access, they became part of, for example, data collection process, and they had the primary data. And the Bureau had not even released a report by data. I think this is very important question we should think about any census. We had also quite a few issues. For example, when I look at the CMI, old CMIs, the one province that was really doing well in terms of response rate was Punjab. Okay, especially in 2010 and 11, response rate was very low in Sindh, for example. Then in 2015 and 16, somehow Punjab Bureau was not conducting these surveys. So there were two parts of it. I think the major part was contracted to urban unit. It's this very good institution, could be very excellent, but does not have that outreach, for example, in Punjab, to not have those offices. So that might raise a lot of questions, because they might have been further subcontracting for the survey purposes. I think Bureau must be having data about it, that who was conducting surveys. And anyone who's engaged in this exercise, like I personally conduct firm surveys. So the firm response rate and the quality of response depends on who is surveying it. So one thing, this was really a surprise for me, that urban unit was doing rather than the Punjab Bureau, which is a lot more, having a lot more expertise, and is relatively better, by the way, than the other provinces. Some others where we see also big changes were directly collected by BOS. This again, because the response rate here would be different, the quality of the data coming would be different. So I could really see why the government was showing such a tremendous growth, because maybe the data was collected in a better way. This is what the report was suggesting. There were also some changes in the frame. And this is interesting, because for all the CMI, the frames were used for Directory of Industries. So I saw that for this 15 and 16 CMI, the
Waqar, 2 minutes more, please hurry up. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so we have seen a change of the of the frame. And this change in frame does not seem to mean increasing the number of establishments across Pakistan. So this is mainly driven by Punjab. And let me share with you this picture. This will show you, if you look at the number of establishments in CMI, there's a huge growth in Punjab and not the similar growth, for example, in Sindh, which is the second most, for example, industrialized kind of province. So a lot of these numbers, which we see a huge coverage claim, is coming from these 32,000 enterprises that were included in frame from Punjab. Okay, so what the new data sources leveraged? Again, I didn't find there's been an enormous increase in the number of alternative, what I call the data sources to digital platforms, which PBS could leverage, but I didn't see those being used. For example, think about the real estate. So there's a lot of information maybe with the Zameen.com, but this was never used. There are also some public data sources that I didn't see were used. One is value-added tax or sales tax. I didn't see it aligning with labor force survey as well. So last two questions that I wanted to put in and to conclude is that does the rebase series seem representative of structural changes to me? I will say I doubt. I doubt because not substantial effort is made in updating methodology, improving traditional data sources, and leveraging new data sources. I would also doubt because the share of services is reduced from 62% that was based on the last estimates to 56%. That's not what one expects in these structural changes. Normally services expand and industry shrinks the way it happens. And this is what also our labor force survey shows, that the share of labor force in services is increasing, not coming down, let's say from 62 to 56. And also what I realized from the data that we don't have those censuses for services, which is a strength. We have always census for manufacturing. I also doubt because when in a single year, like last year, there are two upward revisions in the growth rate, and both are of the big magnitude, 1.5. This actually puts in questions on the national income accounts and their estimation methods. They are really far from desirable. Otherwise, you can't have those big revisions. Revisions that do take place, but these are marginal revisions, not 1.5% twice in a year. And the last question, which many people were asking on the social media, was, what do I make of the revised growth rate of 5.6%, for example? Short answer, I don't know. To give it a context, when GDP is misspecified, and I think here in our case, it is misspecified, the updated growth rate could go in any direction. Given the political economy around the GDP growth, we seldom see it revised downward. So it often goes upward rather than down. Thank you so much, Avisar.
Thank you, Waqar Saab. Thank you. Very good comments. Zahid Asghar Saab, 10 minutes to you. Please stick to the time.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Naeem Zafar, for being with us and giving a detailed briefing on rebasing. And thank you, Dr. Nadeem Haque, for arranging such type of webinars. If I ask you, what is the total worth of these 150 or 200 webinars you have carried during the last 2 years, right? And where is it reflected in the GDP? I don't see it anywhere in the GDP. So basically GDP was a wartime measure, but anyhow, this wartime measure now is still used as a measure of progress, which is probably a great misnomer. So I appreciate the efforts of PBS on rebasing GDP, but as Waqar has rightly pointed out, the surveys and census, basically PBS was remained confused whether it's a census or it's a survey. For example, bricks and kiln factory surveys, they say that we have carried out census, but when we ask them that where is the census, then they come up that this is our sample. Similarly, on CMI data, we have basically a very low response rate from Sindh province, and it is unacceptably low. And with that low response rate, it's basically really risky to calculate the share of that sector. So that remained basically question throughout this exercise. And during that exercise, they mentioned that basically they have dropped some questions, and they have basically dropped some data as well. And at the same time, they mentioned that they took some of the data from annual reports of those firms or companies. The annual reports, firms, companies basically understate or overstate their accounts, either for existence or to avoid taxation or for these type of things. So, and secondly, there are shell companies idea, as we have seen in our neighboring country. So I think that needs to be taken care, as Dr. Naeem Zafar was rightly pointing out, that soon after this census, there will be more comprehensive census. Similarly, in you see services sector, measuring digital services is really a very, very tough challenge. And in this digital era, measuring GDP is a very tough challenge. If you look at your cell phones, you have basically all those apps which are part of your life every time, but those apps are nowhere in the GDP. So in a way, I'm slightly digressing. GDP is basically understating our welfare, although welfare and GDP are different things. But the way we are basically doing this, attending this webinar and all these things, free of cost, and we are using so many free services, so many free apps, basically that's not reflected in GDP, but that's increasing our welfare. So services sector, again, there are issues. For example, in transportation, they mentioned that we have basically this time calculating our private transport. But when we ask that how you have measured this private transport, which is not registered as private, right? They are basically registered as personal vehicles. How we are basically measuring the contribution of that transport to our economy, that question was remained unanswered. Similarly, for example, I think Auto Manufacturing Association reports data on auto manufacturing, but probably, if I'm not wrong, Chinese companies remain out of that. So whether how we account for that data, these type of questions, I think needs to be addressed whenever we revise GDP next time, or if we can incorporate these type of changes. I'll try to be brief because we have already a very comprehensive discussion and challenging are discussing each and every aspect that livestock census and small crop area estimation and all those things we probably cannot do at the moment in this exercise, but these things need to be taken care of. And I think that now we have a PBS which has basically chief statistician. When this exercise was taking place, then our PBS was a headless organization. And probably that was also the reason for doing this exercise in a little less precise way. And this is very important to revise, to rebase GDP, because national accounts are like assets which depreciate over time, and we need to update them according regularly, probably after every 5 years. So I'll be brief and I'll stop here. I hope discussing each and every aspect is not a good idea, but my main concern is that in digital era, taking this GDP just as a measure of progress is a great misnomer in media and our politics, and every economic statistics has always a political value in every part of the world, period. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you very much. Naeem Saab, I'll just take 2 or 3 questions and come back to you for the summing up. Anybody wants to ask any question? Quick, now is your chance. Ji, Dr. Muhammad. Konji, Dr. Muhammad. I can't read the name. Go ahead, Ji, Dr. Saab.
Muhammad Ali Talpur.
Ji, go ahead, Ji.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nadeem. I don't have any question. I just have one suggestion that a potential sector of cotton ginning has the complete potential to be included in the calculation of GDP. As I was listening that the sectors like cotton ginning has also been included. So the cotton picking sector has also the potential to be included, to be calculated and included. Thank you very much.
Ji, apna Ji Amarif Sahab. जी
अस्सलाम जी
जी
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। हाँ जी, बहुत शुक्रिया। सवाल मेरे जहन में 2-3 थे, वो तो डिस्कशन ने बहुत अच्छे कवर कर लिए। सिर्फ एक चीज़ नईम ज़फ़र साहब से पूछनी थी कि पिछली रीबेसिंग में मुझे याद है कि कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर में काफ़ी इश्यूज थे और वो बहुत इजम्पशन बेस्ड था। तो इस दफ़ा क्योंकि डिटेल तो आपने उसमें नहीं बताई, तो क्या यानी कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर की एस्टिमेशन में आप कितना कॉन्फिडेंट हैं इस दफ़ा? थैंक यू जी।
Okay, Ji, Naeem Saab, over to you. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
सर थोड़ी देर के लिए बाहर गए, अभी हमें ज्वाइन कर लेंगे सर। I will try to answer
Please
all
go
of
ahead.
these questions, sir, one by one, sir.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. Starting with the last one, sir, from GMRF, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for this important question. Construction, sir, last base में जब हम कर रहे थे तो उस वक्त भी हमारे ऊपर ये criticism आ रहा था कि we are underestimating this sector और इसको properly estimate नहीं किया जा रहा। और जिस तरह सर ने बताया कि ये कुछ assumptions पे था, कुछ fixed ratios थी जिसके ऊपर ये base कर रहा था। इस base के अंदर और please I hope you will acknowledge this that PBS has transformed itself over the last 2 to 3 years. It has become more open. It has become more data open होना शुरू हो गए हैं। हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं और जो क्रिटिसिज्म हमारे ऊपर होता है, इवन प्राइसेस के ऊपर भी आपने देखा कि हमारे ऊपर जो भी क्रिटिसिज्म हो रहा था, हमने जब रीबेसिंग की तो उसको इनकॉर्पोरेट कर लिया अपने सिस्टम के अंदर। और स्टैटिस्टिक्स इज ऑलवेज एन ऑनगोइंग प्रोसेस। ये इंप्रूवमेंट का प्रोसेस, इस बेस में अगर कुछ चीजें रह गई हैं, जिस तरह आप सब लोगों ने वैल्यूएबल सजेशंस दी हैं, तो सर्टेनली वी विल नोट इट एंड वी विल इनकॉर्पोरेट इट इन द नेक्स्ट रीबेसिंग जब भी होगी। और आपका कोऑपरेशन उस वक्त भी हम रिक्वायर कर रहे होंगे और आपसे ले रहे होंगे। इस दफा सर कंस्ट्रक्शन को प्रॉपर्ली एस्टिमेट करने के लिए हमारे पास हमने 2 सर्वेस किए। एक हाउस होल्ड सर्वे किया क्योंकि ये वो एरिया था जो इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर है ये, और हमारी इकोनॉमी बहुत हद तक इनफॉर्मल है, जिसको मद्देनजर रखना जरूरी है जब भी हम नेशनल अकाउंट्स के ऊपर बात करें कि इनफॉर्मल इकोनॉमी को और अनडॉक्यूमेंटेड इकोनॉमी को प्रॉपर्ली एस्टिमेट करना और उसको प्रॉपर्ली कैप्चर करना इट्सेल्फ एक बहुत बड़ा टास्क है। लेकिन हमने पूरी कोशिश की कि हम एक डिटेल्ड हाउस होल्ड सर्वे करें कंस्ट्रक्शन के बारे में, और इसके पैरेलल फिर हमने जो लार्ज एस्टेब्लिशमेंट्स हैं, जो कंस्ट्रक्शन कंपनीज हैं, उसका भी एक सर्वे किया। और इन दोनों को के रिजल्ट्स को इस्तेमाल करने के बाद हमने कंस्ट्रक्शन की एक्टिविटी को एस्टिमेट किया है इन द फॉर्मल सेक्टर एज वेल एज इनफॉर्मल सेक्टर। जहां तक सर ने बात की कि हमने चीजें अभी एक्सप्लेन नहीं की वेबसाइट के ऊपर, वो बिल्कुल आपकी बात सही है। आपने देखा होगा कि हम ने टेबल्स अपनी वेबसाइट पे डाल दी हैं। विद इन वीक और सो वी विल बी प्लेसिंग अ डिटेल्ड मेथोडोलॉजी सेक्टर बाय सेक्टर। किस सेक्टर में हमने किसको कैसे एस्टिमेट किया है, स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम एग्रीकल्चर टू सर्विसेज, कौन से सर्वेस किए हैं, कौन सी स्टडीज किए हैं, कौन से सेंसस किए हैं, उनके क्या रिजल्ट्स आए हैं, कौन से डिफ्लेटर्स यूज कर रहे हैं, कहाँ पे कांस्टेंट से करंट बना रहे हैं, कहाँ पे करंट से कांस्टेंट बना रहे हैं। एक पूरी डिटेल्ड मेथोडोलॉजी वेबसाइट के ऊपर हम शेयर कर देंगे। इसके अलावा जो आपने बात की कि जो मुख्तलिफ सर्वेज और स्टडीज की गई हैं, उसका सैंपल साइज नहीं बताया गया, उसका सैम्पलिंग फ्रेम डिस्कस नहीं किया गया, डेफिनेटली नहीं किया गया अभी तक, लेकिन उस रिपोर्ट के अंदर भी और इसके अलावा भी जो जो हमारी स्टडीज होंगी उसको हम डिटेल के साथ शेयर करेंगे और वेबसाइट के ऊपर भी डाल देंगे ताकि ये कंफ्यूजन खत्म हो जाए, और उसके अंदर भी जो इम्प्रूवमेंट आपकी तरफ से बताई जाएगी डेफिनेटली दैट विल बी इनकॉर्पोरेटेड इन द नेक्स्ट रीबेसिंग। तो इस हद तक कंस्ट्रक्शन को सर अब हम उन रेशियोज जो फिक्स रेशियोज हम यूज कर रहे थे उससे हट के एस्टिमेट कर रहे हैं। जो एक्चुअल एक्सपेंडिचर हर इंडस्ट्री रिपोर्ट कर रही है कंस्ट्रक्शन के अंदर, एग्रीकल्चर से लेकर सर्विसेज तक, गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर, पब्लिक सेक्टर और प्राइवेट सेक्टर, उसकी मेथोडोलॉजी में आपने प्रेजेंटेशन में भी देखा होगा कि हमने उसको चेंज किया और उससे एक कंसिडरेबल इंप्रूवमेंट भी हमें नजर आई है उसके एस्टिमेट्स के अंदर कि कंस्ट्रक्शन सेक्टर को जो हम अंडर एस्टिमेट कर रहे थे वो बेहतर अंदाज में एस्टिमेट हो रहा है। जहां तक डॉक्टर जाहिद असगर साहब का सवाल था कि डिजिटल एरा, डेफिनेटली इसमें कोई शक नहीं है सर कि ये वो एरिया है, तो डॉक्टर नईम साहब ने इसको स्टार्ट में बता दिया था कि ये वो एरिया है जिसको अभी हमने कैप्चर करना है और होपफुली बहुत से एरिया स्पेशली इस कोविड के बाद बहुत सी ऐसी नई सर्विसेज इंट्रोड्यूस हो गई हैं जिनको कैप्चर करना हमारी इकोनॉमी में जरूरी है। Definitely, we are in touch with the international consultants also कि best practices क्या हैं और regional practices क्या हैं जिसकी बेस पे हम इन activities को अपने system के अंदर incorporate कर सके।
एक
सर
यहाँ एक बात बताना वर्थवाइल है कि ब्यूरो की जो स्ट्रेंथ है वो सेंसस और सर्वे है। जो बिग डेटा या ऑल्टरनेटिव सोर्सेज ऑफ डेटा वो हमारा इतना स्ट्रॉन्ग एरिया नहीं है। तो अब हम इसका फैसला तो कर चुके हैं और ये जो अतीक साहब ने भी बताया कि मल्टीलैटरल से हम असिस्टेंस ले रहे हैं, टेक्निकल असिस्टेंस, उसमें हम उसी को इम्प्रूव करेंगे और जो सॉफ्टवेयर्स और अपनी कैपेबिलिटी बढ़ाएंगे ताकि जो सोशल डेटा है, बिग डेटा है, इसको यूज करके हम जो ऐसे सेक्टर्स जो कि दे आर कॉन्स्पिक्यूअस बाय देयर एब्सेंस उनको हम ग्रेजुअली कैप्चर कर सकें।
इसी तरह सर वकार साहब ने एक लंबी लिस्ट हमारे सामने रखी थी एरिया बाय एरिया की, यहाँ पे कुछ डेफिशिएंसीज उनको फील हुई। डेफिनेटली इसमें वकार साहब ऐसा है कि वी कैन आंसर ईच एंड एवरी क्वेरी व्हिच यू हैव रेज्ड। अगर आप इन राइटिंग देंगे तभी हम आपको ये बता देंगे कि कहाँ पे क्या इश्यूज है और किस आ रही है। माई का जिक्र किया और नॉर्मल ईयर का जिक्र किया। आपने कहा कि गवर्निंग काउंसिल ने 2013 में अप्रूवल दे दी और 15-16 को बेस ईयर रख दिया गया और दैट वाज इन योर वे, इट वाज नॉट अ नॉर्मल ईयर। बट इफ यू लुक एट द रीजन, बांग्लादेश ने अभी 2015-16 को अपना बेस ईयर कन्वर्ट किया है, मालदीव ने कन्वर्ट किया है, तो रीजन के अंदर बहुत से मुल्क हैं जो 2014-2015 को अपना बेस ईयर पे कन्वर्ट कर चुके हैं। दूसरा ये सर क्योंकि इसके लिए फाइनेंस
सॉरी जी आपकी आवाज चली गई। Have we lost PBS? I think we lost PBS, है ना?
Yes, sir.
We have lost PBS.
सर उनकी बैंडविड्थ का इशू है सर।
चलें 1 मिनट देख लेते हैं, नहीं आते तो फिर we'll close. I think overall, let me just say while we are waiting for them, I think overall this has been an excellent effort. They've made a great effort. They've also tried to be very open. They've also tried to explain things very well. जी वापस आ गए PBS जी, go ahead जी, thank you.
जी सर, तो वकार साहब you could hear me. इसमें ऐसा है सर कि 2015-16 जो बेस ईयर रखा गया, तो आपको जिस तरह हमने बताया कि ज़ाहिर फाइनेंसिस की जरूरत पड़ती है, इसमें डिफरेंट वर्कफोर्स की जरूरत पड़ती है और आपको बहुत से सर्वेज और सर्विसेज कंडक्ट करनी पड़ती हैं, तो आपको एक PC1 इन टाइम आपको जमा करवाना होगा, तब आपको पैसे रिलीज होंगे और वो मिलेंगे। तो इसलिए ये प्रोसेस वेल इन टाइम 1 साल 2 साल पहले स्टार्ट हो जाता है कि हमने चूंकि रीबेसिंग करनी है, उससे पहले उसके PC1 की अप्रूवल लेनी है, क्वेश्चनियर्स बनाने हैं, आउटसोर्सिंग करनी है, बजट कहाँ से आएगा, कितना स्टाफ होगा। तो इट्स अ लेंथी प्रोसेस व्हिच स्टार्ट्स well 1 or 2 years before the taking the stock of the base year. तो इस वजह से उसके लिए तो ये हालत, ये जवाब था। जो CMI का आपने जिक्र किया कि 15-16 में शुरू हुआ और 22 में आके उन्होंने उसके रिजल्ट्स दिए, उसमें भी आप देखिए प्रैक्टिकली होता क्या है। 15-16 में जब CMI हो जाता है तो वो जून में खत्म होता है 2016 के। उसके बाद कंपनी, चूंकि ये लार्ज स्केल कंपनीज हैं, वो अपना पहले साल में ऑडिटेड रिपोर्ट नहीं देती, दूसरे साल में, तीसरे साल में जाकर उनका डेटा फाइनल होता है। तो जब तीसरे साल में एक कंपनी अपनी ऑडिटेड रिपोर्ट फाइनल करेगी और आपने CMI करना है और उसको बेंचमार्क बनाना है, तो यू विल हैव टू वेट फॉर इट्स ऑडिटेड रिपोर्ट आल्सो। तो इस वजह से, और फिर आप ये भी जानते हैं कि इस मुल्क में जहां हम रह रहे हैं वहां डेटा कलेक्ट करना कितना मुश्किल काम है और डेटा को क्रिटिसाइज करना कितना आसान काम है। तो ये in this way it takes,
Would I be able to answer you then?
4 years to complete
You're
census
making so many
manufacturing.
wrong assessments.
Waqar sab, let them speak first. Please go ahead, Ji. Go ahead, Ji, PBS.
I would like to add that Waqar sir has made a very good suggestion, and we are already on it with regard to the representatives of the structural changes. Is particularly focusing on the frequency, the quarterly, and the provincial GDP. So now CS is here, Dr. Naeem Zafar, so we start really working on the quarterly accounts as well as the provincial GDPs, and for that, earlier it was prepared somewhere in 13-14 and 15-16, but the results were not cleared by the World Bank as we were in the IMF mission. EFF program was ongoing, so we had discussed with them, and they said that it's not good that you release the number unless you have the real indicators and the sources. We were estimating at the ratios and as proxies, we were taking it up. Now we are particularly focusing on the indicators and the sources of the agency, and for that we have already approached the IMF and the World Bank, and they have shown their interest that they will help us in compilation of the quarterly accounts. So hopefully that for FY22, we will start producing the first quarterly national accounts by the mid of the next year. And in between, we will complete our home exercises and share with the World Bank and development partners. With regard to the geographical level at the GDP at the provincial level, it's also being felt that it's a demand driven, that the more the BOCs are strong and they develop their own GDP, the more the federal PBS will be strengthened. For that, there are certain prerequisites which we have discussed within the provincial government, that they have to first notify the statistical authorities, provincial statistical authorities, and they take the decision from the CCI Cabinet Council of Common Interest. And some of the provinces like KPK and Sindh government, they have started their work, they have started reviewing the data while the reviewing the literature, while the KPK government is in the process of framing the surveys and the studies, and also identifying the sources and the indicator for this purpose. Hopefully that the next financial year we'll be able to help the provincial government in compiling all the provincial GDP. That will be more representative at whole Pakistan.
Ji, thank you very much. Naeem Saab, any last words?
Sir, I think we are done with the questions and comments. Sir, my heartfelt gratitude from PBS, from our colleagues personally, for giving us this opportunity to interact with such an august group of people, practitioners, experts, and we have listened to their advices, suggestions. As Atiq Saab said, that I'm just saying, easier said than done. So it's, you also know that government is monolithic. Moving it is not easy. We are doing it, trying to do it very sincerely, make it more representative, regional GDP, quarterly GDP, make the rebasing exercise more representative of capturing the changes in economy, its structure, ensuring that the pricing is synchronous with the rebasing. So we are doing sincere endeavors. Thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Naeem Saab. Thank you very much, everybody. All I can say is, it's a job well done. I appreciate what you've done. Thank you very much. Full marks. I mean, look, the point is, all pieces of data collection, research, any exercise is always half done. It's never fully done because everything is work in progress. That, I guess, is human destiny. Allah has made sure that we will never be perfect. So, excuse me, by definition, there's lots of questions. Waqar has raised some, Zahid has raised some. By definition, there's lots of progress to be made. But nevertheless, I think this round of the exercise, as far as I can see, is very well done, is very well received. Of course, you will improve it all as we go along, and probably many generations later, people will still be improving it. As Zahid said, this is a wartime measure, but that's not our fault. The SNA forces us to do things a certain way. And yes, the internet economy is not even captured in the US GDP. US GDP, the full impact of the internet economy has been a debate for a while now, and still has to be captured. I don't think we even have the measures to capture them. So there's a lot of work to be done. All I will say, Naeem Saab, is that I think with you there, please involve Pakistani academia. For too long, we relied only on the foreign consultant. I think it would be wise to now start involving Pakistani academia, people like Waqar, people like Zahid, and there are many more, I'm sure, who can rise to the occasion and help you as you go along. And they should also be able to use this data, whatever it is that you conducted so many surveys. I think you should give our academia a greater chance than the World Bank to use these surveys. What happens, unfortunately, is many of these surveys are taken up by the foreign economists, people sitting in Harvard, people sitting in LSE, people sitting in the World Bank. They put out the papers that our academics should have done. And with the result, we look to them and not our academics. So somehow I think, hear what Waqar said, we should give our academics a chance to look at this data, probably at a cheaper price than those overseas. And our economists should be able to contribute to your effort much more than the international economists. That's the only way that we will develop the learning network in society. My biggest fear, and this is what I wrote in my 2017 book, we are not growing a network of thought. And if you read Mokir's book, which Jalil here did a good webinar with Mokir, or podcast, Mokir says in his book, The Culture of Growth, that growth lies in networks of knowledge. Unfortunately, we have not been able to build a network of knowledge because we are being dumped upon by international consultants. So one of the jihads that I'm on is to try and empower our local economists to grow. I know it won't happen in my lifetime, but if I can lay the foundation and watch these guys grow in the next 20, 30 years, I think they will become competitive with the international economists. But we will require people like you to help these guys grow. Yeah, they may initially be, not up to the mark, but I think give them for 5, 6, 7 years, they will come up to the mark. Naeem Saab, thank you very much. We look to your leadership in statistics. MashaAllah, you've begun very well. You've given us a lot to think about. I think the rebasing will not be as controversial as the past one because it's been well done. Thank you. Thank you very much, folks. Thank you, Naeem Saab. Thank you, BBS. Thank you, all in BBS. Waqar Saab, Zahid Saab, Farah Hafiz.